Akanksha, and I'm part of the communications team at NASCOM Foundation. Quickly about the NASCOM Foundation, as the social arm of NASCOM, the NASCOM Foundation is working with industry in achieving its goal of social transformation and impact through technology. NASCOM Foundation is the only organization in the country that has been trusted by the industry, has deep inroads into the social development sector, appreciates great relationships with the government, and has exceptional media engagement, making these the four pillars of any civil society. Hi, Saurabh. Can we have the second slide where we are able to showcase the pillars? The next one, rather. Thank you so much. As you all can see, we have two very important pillars. And with scaling, we've been able to impact more than 1,750,000 people, starting from the bottom of the pyramid, where we train people in digital literacy, up to training the prospective employees from across the industries. Under the Tech for Good Charter, we help nurture and foster innovations by social innovators. We also develop our innovations for social impact as well as work towards creating new social entrepreneurs. Without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Ashok Pamidi, CEO, NASCOM Foundation, to set the context for today's very special and exclusive roundtable. Over to you, Ashok, sir.
Thank you, Akansha. Good morning to all. Last Saturday, India began one of the world's most ambitious vaccination program, aiming to inoculate about 300 million of its population of 1.3 billion by July. Now we all know that this is a massive task by all stretches of imagination. While India, the pharmacy to the world, in fact, I would say the pharmacy capital of the world, knows how to create the best-in-class vaccine, it has again proven time and again that it knows how to eradicate a disease. For example, smallpox in 1979 and polio in 2014, for example. The COVID vaccination drive, however, is a test of India's resilience. COVID-19 and the subsequent damage it has heaped on us as a society and as a nation may take a few years to heal, particularly those who live on the margins. It has led to widening of gaps between the haves and the have-nots, be it access to education, health, jobs, and opportunities. But the visuals of an ordinary health worker, Manish, being inoculated before the politicians and the bureaucrats was just a gesture, but was also empowering in ways that can hardly be encapsulated in words. The theme of this historic vaccination drives strikes an auspicious and welfareist note. Sarve bhavantu sukhinaha, sarve santu nirmayaha. You know what it exactly, roughly, I can say, it translates to be it at peace, be all at peace, may no one suffer from illness. We started fighting against COVID-19 way back in March, as soon as the entire thing set in. And I would like to say that and thank the civil society and various CSR leaders by providing relief in terms of food, hygiene, and various other related materials to the needy. And we are very thankful to all the CSR leaders and the corporate leaders present in this virtual room to have contributed so much so that and so selflessly for the same. With the vaccines now created in a record time, we are entering a proverbial climax to the story of COVID-19 in our lives. What this fight against COVID-19 will require, however, is just not vaccine, budgetary allocations and healthcare facilities. It will need the coming together of like-minded people for fighting against a common cause for attaining a national objective. Nay, I would say it is more a humanitarian objective. This is one such movement where we have people who control, I would say about 65 to 67% of industry CSR spend are actually present today in this room. And I would like to thank you all of you for having spent time with us today. We are very fortunate to have Honorable Professor K. Vijayaraghavan, Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India, to further help us understand and guide us on what it takes to achieve this massive goal and how CSR can be of support to make it happen. We're also thankful to Mr. Gagan Singh, the country head and managing director of AstraZeneca, who will further engage with Professor Vijay Raghavan to give us clarity on the operations, the current and the foreseeable challenges and how companies can help us in this endeavor. To put all these discussions together in a CSR law context, we have Sri Krishna Sridhar Murthy, we call him Krishna, and from Sattva Consulting, and Rahul Rishi from Nisit Desai Associates. So without wasting any more of your time, let me ask my colleague Akansha to call upon Honorable Sri Professor K. Vijay Raghavan, Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India for a small keynote. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Ashok sir, for your thoughtful context setting. And it is an absolute honor for me and my pleasure to now introduce and invite a special guest, Honorable Professor K. Vijay Raghavan sir, Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India. His preceders for this position of Principal Scientific Advisors were late Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, who was the first Principal Scientific Advisor and was followed by Dr. Rajagopala Chidambaram. Professor K.V. Raghavan is also the co-chair of the Vaccine Task Force set up by the Prime Minister's office. Sir, I really request you to come on board and share your thoughts and insight for the largest vaccination drive in India. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Akansha. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here today. And thank you, Mr. Pamari, for that introduction about the background of activities of the NASCOM Foundation. Let me begin by saying that 2020 was an extraordinary year, not just for India, but for the entire planet. And what we are seeing in 2021 is the end of the beginning. And we still need to get out of this, but we see the route, the mechanisms, and what all we have to do. So that's our challenge. Now, let me give you first a little bit of background by dividing what I need to say into three components. What are the past value chain and the efforts which we've done? The future value chain, what needs to be done, and where our role, that is your role and our partnership with you, is going to be impactful. And then what are the specific kinds of interventions which we can take? Now, soon after the pandemic started, I won't go into the details of the steps India took, but one of the interventions which was put in place was the vaccine R&D task force. And it was not a regular kind of R&D task force. It was meant to take immediately the fruits of science and technology into action. Now, this is an enormous challenge, and you from industry know that as well. Science typically progresses as a slow but very effective train which takes large innovative goods to long destinations. Industry focuses on looking at returns for every quarter, and society, especially during the pandemic, wants solutions on a weekly or even daily basis. How do these three different trains communicate with each other effectively? Scientists can do extraordinary things, and there's extraordinary value in that train. But we need a way by which there is a structure which rapidly takes information and goods from that very slow but effective train to the industry train, to the society train, dynamically on a day-to-day basis. And this was the challenge. It seems very difficult. There are three different trains going at three different speeds. How do you communicate and move goods between each other? And that's where structures such as yours, CSR, and people flitting between the three are very important. What did we do? We made PPE, ventilators, oxygen equipment, testing kits, got reagents, and all of this was done at warp speed. And it was done because of the extraordinary foundations of our science and people who are trained in astrophysics, who dealt with big data, or mathematicians who are modeling something else, or mechanical engineers who are building various kinds of structures unrelated to the pandemic. All of them came together with industry and delivered to society. So that was the background. In that background, let me just very briefly tell you about vaccines and what is happening. Very briefly, vaccines are the only robust exit out of this pandemic. And we are very fortunate that this disease, this virus, is not vaccine recalcitrant. In other words, vaccines work. In some diseases, vaccines don't work or they're very difficult to discover. HIV, AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria, big challenge. We still don't have vaccines. Here we've got at least a proof that vaccinations can happen at the early stages, and now there's delivery. Vaccines work by making components which mimic the virus, and when injected, the body prepares an immune defense against those components. And then, when challenged by the virus itself, the immune response remembers this previous intervention, amplifies and fights against the virus at the early stage, preventing the later symptoms of the disease. So this is something which is remarkable. Vaccines take typically 5, 10, 15 years to make. They go through a very slow process, but because of this emergency, there's incredible parallel processing, and therefore we have done globally something which takes a decade in 1 year. Huge amount of money, huge amount of parallel processing, and huge amount of weighing risk versus benefit. The result of that is, while we have vaccines, 2 have been used under emergency use authorization in the country, we also now have a new challenge coming up. When viruses spread all over the world and with such intensity, they also keep changing. Most of these changes are meaningless and they don't affect the virus or they don't affect us, but some make the virus worse and some make the virus more effective. We now have worries that there are some variants which transmit more. There will be, at this scale, other variants which are vaccine escape variants. But we are now prepared to rapidly genomic sequence these viruses so that we can start rapidly in parallel, just as we made vaccines, in parallel make new vaccines, variants of the vaccines which fit the virus. The virus is attacked by the vaccine, it changes a little bit, we change the vaccine a little bit and attack. And this will go on until the virus is completely crushed. And that is feasible, but requires discipline at our end. Now, that brings us to the vaccination program. There are many important aspects of the vaccination program. As we heard from Mr. Pamade, we are planning in the first phase, the priority group, people over 50 years of age, healthcare workers, frontline workers, these amount to 30 crores or 300 million. That itself is enormous, and that we plan to do in 7 to 8 months. How do we do that? Now, right now, for the healthcare workers and the frontline workers, it is a well planned out for 3 crores lean effort, which has a IT platform and a delivery end. And I won't go into the detail, we can talk a little bit about it later. But as we scale to 30 crores, this lean machine will be infiltrated by efforts in a very positive way by the private sector, by multiple players, by NGOs and others, so that it can amplify into a 30 crore program. So there's going to be enormous role for interventions right across in the vaccination drive and delivery, making sure people get to the centers and get back, making sure that the cold chain is okay, making sure that the vaccine disposal of plastics and other things are taken care of, integrating with the science on a regular basis to make sure people are healthy, and also making sure that any variants are detected and new vaccine changes come. Now, keep in mind that the CSR rules have been modified to allow you to support research institutions, incubators, and companies which are directly dealing with COVID can support COVID research as distinct from earlier CSR regulations. And my colleague who's here, Dr. Sapna Poti, will be happy to share these regulations with you. Now let's go into the specific interventions in the future value chain. As I said, purchase and supply of cold storages is going to be very important as we scale to 30 crores, even though these vaccines are at refrigeration or just freezer temperatures, regular freezer temperatures. Still, we will need a huge scale up and a reliability over there. So this ecosystem has been facilitated by the startup ecosystem facilitated by my office will then integrate with this to make sure that there's a last mile access to these kinds of facilities. The supply and purchase of equipment, both in vaccine administration, but also in detection of a variety of new variants which are emerging. That's very important. There's no point in vaccinating blind. That has to be integrated with testing and checking for variants. the supply of consumables for this, and the mobile testing labs to make sure that everything is in order. So these are hardware interventions. We also will have software interventions, which are no less important: communication and training manuals. Imagine an entire country, we need to train people of such quality that they don't make mistakes. Vaccines are administered to healthy people. We don't want them to have problems because of the vaccination program. And therefore, we must make sure that everyone is trained really well. Communication programs are very important. They have to be in every language, so that there's no problem in both the vaccine beneficiaries and those who are administering the vaccines to be well trained in different levels. Then what is happening in terms of the data? We're a very large and diverse country. How is the program going? So we will have a data analysis team. That's critically important. There are many institutions, and this needs to be analyzed at the village, taluk, district, city, town, country level to make sure that the program is going well. And that's a great role for the software area of interventions. And in terms of linking up with people and following up with them, the NGOs and so on need to be tied up with our institutions. So these are very important steps. I'd like to end here by saying that all of this seems daunting, but if you see the list of people on the screen, the list of companies on the screen and what they're doing, which we just saw a little earlier, you're an absolutely incredible set of people. And dividing this complexity into tractable components, working with our office in a dynamic manner to ensure that we can deliver with speed, these three trains of science and technology, industry, and society, even though moving at very different speeds, can be connected on a day-to-day basis. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Professor Sir, for addressing. I think this was extremely insightful, and everybody who's present on the roundtable are, I think, they will be happy to gain so many insights. Now, I don't want to take a lot of time, and we will now move on to a very interesting conversation. And to join Professor Raghavan, I would like to introduce and invite Mr. Gagan Singh, Country President and Managing Director at AstraZeneca Pharma India Limited. A little bit about Mr. Gagan. Mr. Gagan has been responsible for driving AstraZeneca's science-led strategy in India, and he started his journey in AstraZeneca in 2006. In 2012, he took charge as the country president of AstraZeneca Philippines, and post a successful stint in this role, he moved to the United Kingdom as global head of established brands GICD. Prior to AstraZeneca, he has worked with organizations like Baxter, India, and Eli Lilly. Before I invite our eminent leaders, I would like to request everybody who is present in the session today to post questions only in the Q&A panel, and the questions should be pointed towards the vaccination drive and the expectations from the same. For the CSR specific questions, we will open the Q&As in the next segment. I would now like to hand over to Mr. Gagan. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Akansha, and a very good morning to you, sir, and thank you for joining us today. I think, like you said, and it's so inspiring to hear the remarkable work the government has done in keeping us all safe, as well as well informed about the entire development process around the vaccine and potentially around the rollout as well. And it's really inspiring to hear that. I think overall, the COVID-19 pandemic is a global challenge, and we all agree with that. And I must say, I'll self-compliment the pharma industry here for really rising up to the occasion and delivering in this catastrophic times some deep end science. And like you rightly said, sir, that it always takes about 8 to 10 years to really develop a robust vaccine program. And here we've really crunched it in a very, very short period of time for about a year. Maybe that kind of segues into one of the most open debates that we have these days, is that how is the government ensuring safety as well as efficacy of these vaccines?
Thank you, Gagan. So the important question here is, how is the government ensuring the safety as well as efficacy of these vaccines? This is such a by the way, may I request those who are not speaking to please mute? I'm getting a little bit of background. Thank you. This is a very important question, and I'm glad you brought this up front. And I'll go through it speedily, but hopefully well. Now, there are three phases in vaccine development, and those three phases are preceded by laboratory work, which develops the vaccine candidate and tests that in animals. So after you test for the pharmacology and the safety in animals and how they work in animals in a variety of ways, you come to human trials, which are phase 1, which are small in number, but substantially address issues of safety in a very robust manner. Then you go to phase 2, where you measure both safety, you continue to do that, and you also measure immunogenicity. How does the body respond to the vaccine candidate? And then you go to phase 3, where you continue to look at safety on a much larger scale. You continue to look perhaps at immunogenicity on a small scale that's been measured earlier, but you substantially look, and this is very important, at how the people who are vaccinated with the candidate behave in response to the disease in comparison to the placebo arm, and that is unblinded at a later stage. This is the standard process. Now, you must keep in mind that in parallel with this, something else is happening. That is, the disease is ravaging the population, and different diseases do that at different levels. So when do you introduce a vaccine into regular market licensure? That is done when there's no great pressure and you take your time and you develop vaccines, and that's what takes 5-10 years. And when do you do that? When there's a great pressure, such as during a pandemic, and how do you do that in different kinds of pandemics? So those are the balances which need to be done. So there's no absolute measure of safety or efficacy, and that's why you have structures like emergency use authorization. You have a view that, look, this is very, very likely to be safe. I can, haven't completed my phase 3 trials yet, and that's many vaccines globally have been authorized in that situation. And in India, you have 2 vaccines, the AstraZeneca Oxford Serum Institute vaccine Covaxin, where there is a rule that our regulator needs to have trials done here, even if phase 3 is done outside. Those trials are not complete yet, and those are bridging trials. They are not phase 3 trials in the standard sense. They don't measure efficacy, but they measure that everything is fine in our population in a small group. That isn't complete, but emergency use authorization was given. A different kind of emergency use authorization was given to Covaxin. The first was Covishield. The first was given to Covaxin, the Bharat Biotech Astra's ICMR vaccine, where after phase 2, but remember that phase 3 is full throttle in progress, and therefore we will get the phase 3 results reasonably soon. It's not that phase 3 is not started or not going to start or will take a long time. And the reason why that has been given another kind of emergency use authorization is that given the state of the pandemic and given the huge concern of the kinds of variants happening and seeing what's happening in UK, US, and now in Brazil, again, the resurgence, vaccination programs have to roll off. So it's that weighing between these two, perfect being the enemy of good, and when do you take a decision? It's a big challenge for governments all over the world. They have to take these hard decisions, and therefore this kind of decision has been taken. But to cut a long story short, these will both go into regular authorization, we expect, when results come in, hopefully in a short period of time, and other vaccines will also roll in. Sorry I took that much time, Gagan.
No, thank you. But this is really important. And I think in many ways, people got to realize that, both these platforms are platforms which have been available for vaccine development over the years. So they've been tested in other forms of vaccines as well. So from a safety perspective, while the clinical trials are on, but even the emergency use has been, a lot of thought has gone in when the government has given that. But it's very helpful to hear it from you, sir. coming through. I think, one of the other aspects of it, which people continue to ask all of us who are associated with the vaccine rollout, is around the cold chain integrity. And I'm sure that's a question which doesn't escape you as well. Particularly, given that, beyond the big cities, big hospitals in India, there are electricity challenges and there are, difficulty in logistics. I just wanted to kind of bring to seek your views on this. And also additionally, probably ask that, how can we, as leaders in technology who've gathered here, could also help in the last mile connectivity or in this very wide distribution program.
Thank you. This is very important. There are two components to the last mile. What is done in the supply side and what needs to be done at every step downstream. At the supply side, you have vaccines going from manufacturing hubs to huge warehouses, and then downstream to smaller and smaller warehouses in refrigerated trucks, and then to distribution centers. So almost all of these are powered. That is, they're driven by connection to the electricity, and they're also checked by ways in which if you change the temperature at any time during the process, that will be flagged automatically. So supposing in a delivery truck, the temperature shoots up and then it comes down again, you would know it shot up and that batch would be out. So those kinds of technologies are in place at the delivery, at the supplier. Now remember, we are doing this now for 3 crores, 30 million people, right? And it's going to scale up to 30 crores very soon. And then all over the country, as vaccines go into regular market licensure, other sectors will open up and they'll be delivering. There is going to be an enormous demand for these kinds of hardware to be in place in a more efficient way, in a more distributed way, so that they're effective. This is the time today to start putting that in place and scaling. And there your partnership is absolutely vital. Otherwise, we would be responding to Band-Aid fixes 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year from now. These kinds of cold chain hardware and software for making sure that everything is okay will not go waste after the pandemic. They will be invaluable for a variety of sources. I mean, we can all imagine what they will be. I won't go into that now, but that's there. But right now the chain is robust, but as it scales, it needs to be not managed in a feed forward manner, but should have feedback components of various kinds and multiple participants of various kinds.
Thank you. I think that clearly clarifies that we're very proud of the fact that this will be world's one of the largest rollout programs. And, as an industry, we really stand shoulder to shoulder in really helping out. And I'm sure my other panelists will elaborate even more around what we could do with our CSR funds and what we can potentially bring on table in this rollout. But as we still talk about rollout, I'll do the difficult part, because this is one question which continues to be raised even today on the Q&A, and I've been always asked this question. So maybe I take this opportunity to ask you, sir, any plans for rollout for more common people, or if yes, then when?
Absolutely. By the way, I would take that phrase, more common people, in a whole range. Even amongst healthcare workers and frontline workers, there are people who come from really extremely disadvantaged sections of society. They deal with all of us and help us. And therefore their protection is the top priority so that they can continue to serve us. So that's one important component. The next category, people above 50. Remember, in most other countries in the world, the priority groups are people above 60 or 65 as the most vulnerable. We have chosen people above 50 because in our country, because of the presence of a variety of issues, economic, social, lifestyle, and so on, that amounts to 300 crores. So you're going to be touching a very large number of the common people in that. Now, the rest of the country, they constitute, of course, they're very important, but we are a very young, large bottom pyramid, and they will then be simultaneously be vaccinated. Now, here's a simple answer to this long drawn talk which I gave. First quarter supply is going to be less than demand. Second quarter supply and demand will start matching. Third quarter or so, you're going to have no shortage of demand. India, as we heard from Mr. Pamadi, is the vaccine and drug supplier of the world. We will be able to do that. There are many other vaccines coming in. They will go into the supply chain. And by the way, regarding the cold chain issue, there are vaccines which are being developed, one of which at least is a room temperature vaccine. And that will also go into speed. So we will have no shortage of vaccines, and really us working together to make sure that the delivery end, working with the government to make sure the delivery is fine, and with the private sector, will make vaccines available for everybody.
Thanks. That's very, very reassuring, and I'm sure everyone here will carry that message of hope and optimism that in Q3, we could have a situation where if we need vaccine, we'll be able to have an access to it. But once again, enormous thank you. I know it's an enormous job that the government is doing here all across. So during your talk, you also touched upon leveraging digital, leveraging technology, and you said you'll probably elaborate a little later. Maybe this could be a good time to see and hear your thoughts on how you intend digital and technology to help in rolling out this massive vaccination program.
This is such an important matter, and tech is very, very important, but tech alone cannot do the job. You need tech and people to work together in a manner which, some people have called bridgital, bridging the digital and the real world. This is not my word. It's, from, I think, Mr. Chandrasekhar and the Tata Sons person who wrote a book on that. So what we need is digital technology to make sure that the delivery is good. People have health IDs which are portable. They can, go from one place to another and yet have the information with them, and they're empowered. And this is an enormous challenge which the National Health Authority and several others are taking up in partnership with the Health Ministry's vaccination drive. So it's not just about vaccines, it's about health delivery in multiple ways. But just hold that for a moment. Hold also the other component, that there are a very large number of people in our country who don't have phones, who have only feature phones, or who don't have access to onboarding of various kinds of portals where this will be done. And hold the third component, that these systems cannot be done on scale as a network with a guaranteed robustness all the time. There will be, fissures and, breakdowns at different locations. So there also manual interventions are needed. So this combination of ensuring access and equity while having technology and dealing with issues which come up is a challenge which we cannot copy from anywhere in the world. It's something which we are good at dealing with and we must deal with. And there, that partnership is really very, very important.
Thank you so very much for your thoughts there, sir. And my final probably question of having you here is to ask you this question, that your expectations from us, given the synergistic partnerships which are possible between the NASCOM Foundation and you, maybe a couple of your thoughts on what we could do to help in the entire program.
It's a very simple statement, but very complicated to implement, and we must try and do that. Our goal is simple. Move from doing only the possible into doing something which has disproportionate impact, right? And that is not easy. All of us, when we're faced with all sorts of hurdles and problems and so on, say, okay, I've got to put this money in a decent place. Let me just do it and get done with it here. That's okay. That's not bad. You get something done in a small way. But here is an opportunity if we work together and ease out the rough edges which will surely come up, but do that with speed, get rapid proposals, work with our office, get them through. I think there's an opportunity to have our impact very hugely disproportionate to what our specific intervention is. So catalytic impact is our goal.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so very much for your time. I think there was just one comment there in the Q&A. Maybe I can respond and then I can ask you to respond. One of the questions was that is there an inequitable access to vaccines globally? And I just wanted to kind of take this opportunity to share that at AstraZeneca, when we tied up with Oxford, one of our commitment is equitable and not for profit access. And that's one of the reasons we've gone ahead and tied up across the globe with 3 billion doses. And all this during the pandemic will be provided, through routes like Gavi, WHO, and others to ensure equitable distribution of the vaccine. Maybe, sir, I can bring you also in this conversation and ask your reflections on equitable distribution within the country.
This can be summarized in one phrase: no one is safe until everyone is safe. And therefore, even from a selfish point of view, equity and access is very important. From a moral point of view, there's no doubt equity and access is critically important. And for a country of our size, we have an enormous challenge. Our economically challenged sections, our poorest, have borne the brunt of the load during the pandemic. And, they must get vaccines on time. So that's a very important challenge. So for us to work together and take this forward, you saw that slide about the areas where CSR and NASCOM and Foundation in particular can work. And Dr. Sapna Poti in my office and I are always there to, work with you and make sure that what we do is most effective.
Thank you so very much, sir. And it's really an inspiration to hear. Wish you all the very best for this enormous task that you and your department is taking on. But really proud of your achievements. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gagan, for a brilliant fireside chat. I think we've put you on a spot to ask some important questions to Sir. And I think, Sir, you've answered them also flawlessly. But I would also, while, we are talking about vaccinations, I also have some questions that have come in from the people who have attended. And I want to pick up while we've tried to answer most of them. There's one or two that I would like to also, take the pleasure of asking you. So Padmini says that, for organizations specializing in AI, how can they help specifically when they talk about artificial intelligence in the whole drive? Can they play any role, or an AI, can it play any role?
This is a very valuable point. We have data coming in at multiple levels, and they need to be analyzed, converted into information, to knowledge, and then to decision making. And this happens at the level of the central government, the health ministry, and at the state government. Now, very practically, what we need to do is, my office will be happy to work with you to identify institutions. We have 4 major clusters of institutions in Hyderabad, Pune, the National Capital Region, and Bangalore. And there are about really top quality institutions, tens of them in each of these places. We can work to have AI nodes over there, develop projects which are going to be critically important for the vaccination program across its spectrum, and work to see where you can impact that most. And every aspect of vaccination requires data analysis and feedback into decision making.
That's a wonderful point put together. I believe, that's a very wonderful use of technology. So I'm sure, Padmini, you've kind of got the answer. We can definitely try and collaborate later. You can reach out to us. Now, second question, sir, is Pratiksha has asked us, should corporates that are into healthcare, education, food production, and other high interaction industries mandate vaccines as a matter of employee safety? Which is like, can that become?
Right, let me just complete, my apologies for the noise of the background, that's not me. But yeah, let me go back to your previous question and say that, Microsoft and IBM also have worked with us on the AI in a big way. Now, there's no question that going through on the other points you mentioned about nutrition, other kinds of access on vaccination, it's very important. Those are, factors which play into the effectiveness of vaccination, no doubt about that. They're not core to the vaccination program, but in some situations they may be important, and it's good to search them out and see. But that will not be necessarily a general aspect of intervention.
True, true. Very well put up, sir. And how can organizations, specifically when we're talking about the tech industry, these corporates can help roll out these vaccinations? Like, is there anything that you're visualizing, a vision for them, and how these corporates can actually roll this out?
Corporates can play a very important role because you have a defined machinery in the government machinery and in the state government machinery and so on. But there are lateral interventions which are needed for corporates to come in. They can best come in when they intervene with an intermediary, which is our major research, science and technology institutions, which across the spectrum have quality people who can work with the government and deliver for the government and work with you and make sure that your inputs are most valuably used. NGOs also, by the way, not just our research institutions.
NGOs, truly, truly. Well, it has to be an ecosystem coming together. I think it's going to be a collaboration. I think we have to support the government in every possible way, and that goes for the industries, for the social sector, practitioners, and everybody else. With that, the next question that I want to ask is, somebody said that we are hearing about inequitable distribution of vaccine. Rich countries are buying and stocking, etc. This being the situation, priority being healthcare workers, what could be the reasonable timeline for the corporates to produce vaccine for their staff? Now, it's, I think, very, very specific, somebody has asked.
So good news is that India makes vaccines. So that's a substantial positive aspect. We also deliver vaccines to the rest of the world. So having equitable access here, as I said to Gagan a little earlier, you're going to have, after the first quarter, supply being matching demand, and that will keep going up. So corporate vaccination programs and so on will take off very soon after that. So I would say after April or so.
Wonderful, wonderful. That's a very definite timeline, I believe. So the next question comes from Adarsh Mehrotra. He says, we understand there will be a need for mobilizing resources, which is volunteers, to drive the vaccinations. How can people from organizations get involved and contribute? I think.
No, a key statement which the Prime Minister has repeatedly made about vaccine delivery is a word called Jan Bhagidari, that all of us need to be involved in this at each of our levels, as individuals, institutions, corporates. So there are multiple structures which will be in place for all these interventions. So any specific aspect on how to do it, we would be glad to help. So you can come in as a corporate itself through CSR and by multiple ways. Remember, there are enormously diverse contexts where this partnership will be needed, and there's room for each kind of work on a large scale. Our principal focus is where science and technology impacts directly, and there's a huge range over there. So this is unusual in a social intervention where there's a deep connect with science, and that deep connect is with science which is changing at the cutting edge every day. That's why my office is playing this role. It's not a regular CSR activity where you can do what you want on a local level. To amplify your consequences of your effort hugely, or even to make them effective, science is critical, and that's where Sapna and the team and I would be very glad to help.
Wonderful. No, I completely agree with you, sir. I think it's the largest vaccine drive, and to serve a nation like India, there has to be, like you said, a collaboration, and everyone can volunteer. The organizations play a very, very important role in this entire agile, ecosystem that we are standing a bit. With that, I want to actually pose one question to Gagan sir also. I think there's a question from Sadhna. And I want to ask you, she's wanted to ask you, like, BCG MMR is in this vaccine. Is this vaccine expected to be part of the STD infant immunization program? That's very specific and categorically. So maybe you can help answer this one.
It's. I think at this point of time, maybe it's difficult to say that this vaccine will be part of a larger vaccination program. As we said at the start, it takes years to build a vaccine program and then have a year by year rollout program. At the present moment, it's difficult to say because we're still continuing to study the program. But I'm very sure Professor Raghavan would agree that our understanding and knowledge of rolling out these mass vaccination programs will go a long way in helping being applied to this particular rollout program as well. So it in many ways it will have synergistic benefit, but will it be part of it? Probably healthcare authorities will take a deeper look at data before deciding that.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think we're like professors have said that, we are at the end of the beginning. So all these things will pop up. And I think there's slowly, we are going to reach to a solution where we'll be addressing all of these practically. I have one question to ask to sir. We are getting so many questions. We are getting overwhelmed, but I don't want to kind of, miss this opportunity. And there's someone in the session has asked, sir, if you could please request to share your views on India population having moved to phase of herd immunity, hence decline in overall positive cases. If it's true, will vaccination still be required?
Thank you. This is a very important question. And let me say that this is now increasingly becoming addressed in a rather difficult way. Look at countries such as the UK or the US, where there have been substantial waves of great strength earlier, and look even at our cities. What has been happening everywhere is that the spread, even when intense, is in pockets of cities and not in the entire city. Herd immunity in a population comes about when, if you view the population as an equally mixed bucket and a certain percentage is, has the disease, you can see potentially the possibility of herd immunity. But when there's a high level in some pockets and not much elsewhere, these other locations are constantly exposed to new attacks. And that's what's happening in the US, in the UK, in Manaus and Brazil is just terrible. Second point, keep in mind that on the road to herd immunity, so-called herd immunity, you are going to lose an enormous number of lives, and with long COVID and other kinds of problems, you're going to have extraordinary morbidity. So herd immunity as a strategy is not okay. Has herd immunity happened despite not having it as a strategy? Answer is no. Manaus in Brazil is an example. There's a very large number of people who are infected, but it just keeps coming again and again. And now there's worry about new waves of new variants coming. So, while that might have been an interesting theoretical possibility sometime back, it's no longer the case now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, sir. I think, when we are talking about collaborations, I have one question for Ashok sir, where I think somebody is quite interested and intrigued to understand the role about where NASCOM Foundation steps in the entire vaccination drive. So Ashok sir, would you like to share some more insights onto that with our attendees?
Sure. Thanks, Akansha. I think it's a very good question, because when we have a large, like we have almost 3,000 and odd NASCOM members, and a very large other members also who are actually working with us. So we become more of a convener, of taking all these different types of ideas and thoughts which are there. And at one end we have the PSAs, the entire department, and other end from the corporate, like NASCOM Foundation, who plays a role more of a convener. And basically that's what we will do, is facilitate those things directly to the the PSA, and that's the role which we intend to play. Not to say that, obviously in every CSR funding, every CS company's approach, like somebody says AI, and somebody might even give their plant for manufacturing, because they're all coming in from startup ecosystem. And I'm sure the PSA must be looking at large scale manufacturing of these cold storage devices, right? So those are some of the other initiatives which can be taken up. So we'll just be more of a facilitator in this activity, a convener, so that we are able to give the right inputs to the organizations, and so that they can make best use of their funds and resources. And that's our endeavor in this exercise.
Wonderful, Ashok sir. Thank you so much for putting that out. I'm sure we will be having more such roundtables, and we have the next segment to get into the depth of it. Before I kind of close this Q&A, and I think I'm really taking the pleasure of asking more and more questions to the eminent panel. Sir, Professor Sir, I have last question to you, which has been asked by Srinivasan. He is, requesting to know your views on how safe is it for corporates to open offices in India, especially when we are talking about a lot of GCCs in India, the global house centers. Is it safe to open office if we have mix of staff who have vaccinated and some not willing to take vaccines? How do we address this situation? I think this is very specific again.
This is where vaccine-derived herd immunity matters. When a substantial part of the population has been vaccinated, and we don't know what that substantial part needs to be yet, but we have guesses of various kinds. And when the virus levels goes down, and people have already continuously for some time adopt distancing measures, the average of these three will be that it is perfectly safe to do so. So at a population level, at a corporate level, at a factory level, I don't expect this to be an issue at all. It might be at a level of individual decision making that you're going to see it. So I don't think that's a problem. I should state, that you have the slide up about the kinds of interventions people can make and how they can come in. That's a very important point. But I'd like to add one more point, which I don't think came up in the questions. But if you keep that slide on, that's important for others to see before I leave. But one important point is, look, we're vaccinating at the first priority group 300 million. In a population of 300 million, if you don't do anything, people will have stomach upsets, cough, cold, allergies, they will fall seriously ill, slightly ill, they'll die, and so on at a certain frequency, right? That is normal. If you vaccinate, these things will still happen. So you should not think that everything that happens after vaccination is because of the vaccination, right? People will investigate everything which happens and say, this happened after immunization, but is it because of immunization? And then they will find out whether that is the case or not. There are some situations, particularly immediate allergic reactions of strong kinds, which could be immediately because of the vaccine. There could be some situation where extremely frail people could be potentially stressed out by a variety of ways, physiologically and psychologically, and may have problems. But at a population level, not everything which happens after immunization is because of immunization. So that communication part I talked about is very important to convey this to people.
Absolutely, absolutely. I believe I think I read somewhere, somebody has said that if you want to risk your life, people who are scared of vaccination, they should risk their life for living. So that's what it goes. With that, one last question. I have so many, but I really don't want to miss this chance. I have got from Shiraz from Microsoft. I think she has a very valid question. She said that we saw that during the lockdown, many NGOs came forward to lead the COVID relief efforts, and they were all working on ground. Can non-profits working in high-risk zones be considered as frontline workers for receiving COVID vaccinations under CSR?
This is a very, very important point. And, I think if there could some way by which I could get a formal letter from the NASCOM Foundation, for example, I will immediately follow this up. This is a very interesting and important point. Frontline workers, doesn't mean government frontline workers. It means what the state government defines, and that's very important. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think, yes, we work very closely with NGOs, and that's a very good point, Shiraz. Thank you so much for that. I think we've just kind of reached that time, and I think, sir, I just cannot thank you enough. You've been so humble. You've answered all the questions and, taken the time out. I want to really thank you. And Gagan, sir, I want to thank you. And, both the offices, I think we worked very smoothly. This roundtable was very, very, very special to all of us. Any last words that, sir, you want to share? And then probably I'll request Gagan, sir, to share any last words, please.
No, I think we've had a really good conversation. Thank you very much, Akanksha, Gagan, and Ashok, for pulling this together. It's really wonderful interacting with everyone. And as I said, Dr. Sapna Poti and I and all of us at my office are always available to take all of our interactions forward. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Akanksha, I'd echo this by saying a big thank you for organizing this. Science is paramount is the only thing that I take away from sir's conversation. Let's rely on science and data to make decisions here.
Wonderful. Ashok sir, do you want to say some last remarks?
I think the last thing I would say is that it has already been proved time and again that when industry, oblique, the civic societies, the startup and the incubators, which is being supported by government, and the government itself join hands, then we've seen that clearly a lot of wonderful things happen. It's a fact that we've already produced some amazing stuff during the COVID times, and I'm sure many more such innovative ideas and products and solutions will come forward when all three join hands together to make this happen. So I would like to thank the PSA, the Government of India, the corporates who are present here, as well as the civil societies for making this happen. And we look forward to more such collaborations in the near future.
Wonderful. While I want to tell everybody that the session is not yet over, we will move on to the second segment of this session. I would really want to thank Professor K.V. Raghavan and Gagan, Mr. Gagan for taking that time out for this valuable presence and address the special roundtable. We can't thank you enough. And, we look forward to more and more collaborations. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All the best.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
With that, we
thank you. Bye. Bye, sir. Bye. Hi, everyone. With that, we now move on to our next segment with the CSR specific discussions and the Q&As. I think we discussed the larger and the overall vaccination drive related discussions, but now we'll get into more CSR specific discussions. And to do that, I would first like to invite Sri Krishna Sridhar Murthy, co-founder and CEO Sattva, to share his thoughts and an overview on the entire implementation of the vaccination drive. Hi, Sri Krishna. Hi. Over to you.
Hi, Akanksha. Thank you so much for the opportunity. It was a fantastic session before this, and I think it's at least I don't know about Rahul, but at least I'm going to only disappoint. After that wonderful set of insights. Since I know we have a lawyer on the panel as well, so I'm going to kind of talk more from the perspective of what programmatic possibilities are there. I know there are a lot of questions coming from the law perspective for employees, and I'll let Rahul kind of take a lead on that. But just want to share a few opening thoughts and then probably address some of the questions as well. When the COVID hit and the data that we had analyzed for last year, about close to 40 to 45% of CSR was committed to fighting COVID, which is this current financial year, and that was I think tremendous effort by corporate and CSR ecosystem. Obviously, we had fantastic work done by the non-profit ecosystem on the ground. But if we analyze the data more deeply, we realize that there were certain types of companies that contributed, and a big chunk of that went to PM Cares, and which was a large part of the CSR spend, and a lot of that money also kind of went from either PSU or Indian conglomerates And a lot of the other industries actually decided to do most of the spend through their own program. So it's an interesting, we already have one, trend to kind of look at how CSRs have contributed and what the mindset or the, expectations slash thought of the CSRs was, and based on that we can then tailor what kind of opportunities can exist going forward, in continuing to fight against COVID, especially from a vaccination point of view. And building on what Professor said and what Sapna has been kind of putting out as well, I think there are 3-4 different types of opportunities for CSRs to consider here. One, clearly, there's a lot of contribution that's possible from an infrastructure point of view. Everything from scientific research to the last set of tests that are going on, to more infrastructure in terms of analysis, data, both and also hardware infrastructure like cold storage. So there's a lot of infrastructure related CSR investment that's possible for a variety of organizations. The second, is definitely was on communication and awareness building, which is, I think, a massive opportunity. The social sector in many ways specializes in engaging communities on awareness, behavior change, type of programs. So that, I think, is another important area to to kind of look at. And as there was a discussion about the common people, coming later in the in the vaccination drive, there will be a lot of common people who may not be able to afford the vaccines. So as we move forward, there might be an opportunity in our communities, to our beneficiaries, to make the vaccination be available. So I think we would look at it from some of those set of activities as well. I think knowing how easy or difficult it is sometimes for CSRs to completely change their strategy. Not everybody is already tuned to, for example, funding infrastructure or funding awareness or funding something else. I think it's important for every CSR to look at what fits them. What kind of activity fits them. And two, I think the law is very clear. While there has been a circular that CSR can contribute to vaccination, it has to be in the construct of CSR itself, in terms of it has to be programmatic. It has to have a proper set of implementation partners, a clear set of measurement. All of those things will continue to hold. And I think, given a lot of the CSRs already have existing beneficiaries, large networks, and also, in many ways contributing to this healthcare, part of the story across the country, they can find many hooks, in terms of how they can get themselves onto this, vaccination approach, especially in these 3 large buckets that we just talked about. But I do hope that the CSRs will contribute, step up. We are hearing that from many of our friends and customers in the CSR ecosystem, that they want to contribute, and we hopefully will take that a similar kind of a push like at the beginning of COVID, to probably hopefully bring an end to this situation as well. So with that, Akanksha, I'll just hand it back to you, and we can probably take more questions as we go along.
Thank you so much, Sri Krishna, for sharing your thoughts. So what we'll do is I will now request Rahul Rishi to come over. I think he's the man of the hour right now. So we'll just have him over, and then we'll have a complete Q&As, and I'll request all the audiences to put your questions with the name of the panelists that you would like to pose your questions. And I will also request Dr. Sapna Poti if she can take up some questions. I'm sure it's a pleasure to have her with us. Stay back with us. So you can all put your questions for all the 3 eminent panelists over here. So over to you, Rahul. I think, let's kind of give it over to you then.
Great. Thanks, Akanksha. Thanks, Krishna, for that good introduction on the CSR aspect. I think you have largely covered the areas that CSR laws will have to be looking into, but at the same time, we'll also have to understand few specifics on the legal and regulatory side of how CSR pans out in relation to COVID-19 issues and challenges. And then there are 2 to 3 specific issues that I think a lot of our listeners have in mind. One of them is how exactly would they be using CSR funds to ensure vaccine immunization programs for their own employees. To what more can they do using CSR funds on the vaccine side of implementation of such programs? And recently, the MCA, which is Ministry of Corporate Affairs, had clearly clarified that so far CSR funds are to be used in respect of providing public outreach or campaign activities wherein more awareness is being created around the entire vaccine program. So to that extent, CSR laws currently, specifically Schedule 7 and CSR rules, do not allow for companies to create to vaccinate their employees, and expenses incurred towards such vaccinations to be allowed as a valid CSR expenditure. Now, there's been a lot of there's been a lot of chattering going around this among companies, and I've also been hearing this from a lot of companies saying that, look, companies should also be allowed to use their CSR funds to vaccinate their employees and or their contract workers and so on and so forth, because this is in the larger welfare of the general public. While this is a very good argument to make, we'll also have to look at the liability insurance side of it, and then try understanding whether companies would then want to push for this as part of the permissible CSR activities, and what could be other legal, regulatory, and insurance issues that may also come connected with it. So for example, there are certain specific product specific liabilities that are incumbent upon the manufacturers to have, and the fact that this entire vaccine program is initially administered on primary healthcare workers. So I think this entire vaccine program also needs to come at a level where the mass vaccination is rolled out, and if that happens, probably MCA would want to look at allowing companies to also use their CSR funds for vaccination. But the another question that equally remains important is, to what extent would companies be held liable in case there are any adverse effects, or in case there are any side effects that employees may face in respect of such vaccinations that they may have? Now, that again would be incumbent on whether the entire vaccination program is mandatory or is it more voluntary in nature. Now, to the best of my understanding, most of the vaccine programs are generally are not generally mandatory in nature in that sense of the word, but people do realize the importance of having those vaccines in the first place. And when we look at the trend that US, UK, and EU has followed, where they have provided specific indemnities to manufacturers for any potential adverse reactions that these vaccines may have. So when we import those jurisprudence in our Indian context, what we find is that while companies may want to explore the importance of using CSR funds for vaccination programs, are they also looking at potential, legal and regulatory implications of it in case there are adverse effects that may happen, or if there are specific claims that employees may have against the employer for any potential health effects that they may have? So I think this conversation to me still looks a bit loop-sided as of now in terms of companies wanting to do certain things, but at the same time, we must also realize that while there could be a desirable outcome of allowing companies to use their CSR funds for vaccination, but we'll also have to look at the insurance and liability aspect of it before we look at this issue with a more nuanced approach of wanting to understand whether it should be mandatory in the first place by employers, to how best are employers equipped to allow for such insurance covers for any adverse reactions that may happen, and thirdly, a lot of insurance liability things would also be incumbent upon at what stage are these vaccines program currently being run. I mean, is it at a clinical trial stage? Because once it becomes a product, then the entire liability insurance aspect changes into a product liability insurance, right? So I think these are important facets that companies also need to understand before wanting to really implicate the usage of CSR funds for vaccination. But yeah, I do see a potential for the concerned regulators to allow some legroom for companies to at least explore their CSR funds in respect of moving outside of simply the immunization program vis-a-vis CSR expenditure, and maybe also wanting to create physical infrastructures, wanting to create supply chain management systems in place. And probably these things right now are not explicitly mentioned within Schedule 7, but when we look at the larger contextual interpretation of Schedule 7 in terms of public health, these areas do tangentially fall within Schedule 7. It would still be very much desirable for the MCA to reclarify those positions. So, for example, today, as Krishna had also earlier mentioned, that we do foresee a lot of infrastructure-related CSR expenditure that may happen. Now, if that is going to be the case, our companies would then be allowed to claim certain deductions on those expenses that they make under Section 37 of the Income Tax Act. Would that be allowed as business expenses for the companies? And the fact that CSR laws have also allowed for business integration into their CSR objectives. So now we could have a situation where these business integrations via CSR expenditure could also be allowed certain deductible business expenses for the companies. And if that happens, I strongly believe that CSR fund can actually have multiplier effect in terms of creating a supply chain management, or in terms of creating a physical infrastructure management in respect of the larger vaccine program that we are looking at. So these are few possibilities that CSR funds would have in incoming months, and I think there needs to be a concerted correspondence that needs to go between dialogue, not correspondence, rather between foundations, relevant stakeholders, as well as the government bodies, to understand how best do we leverage CSR funds that we have in order to expand this entire scope of our vaccination program, which also we would go on to strengthen our public health system in India.
Great. Thank you so much, Rahul, for such an in-depth discussion. I'm sure we will dwell upon it further when we have questions. Before we move ahead, I wanted to request Dr. Sapna Poti to share her thoughts for the overall. I think you've been working so closely with the PSA, and what are your thoughts in it? How do you visualize all this coming together, and where all the organizations can come and become part of it?
Sure. Thank you, Akansha. Can I have that slide back so that I could explain the slide better? And also, just for your information, MCA goes by the originator. So the originator of these clauses has been our office, PSS office, and hence we have articulated the clauses that MCA has notified. Be it incubators or be it regarding research, where CSR funds can be done, and also vaccination and COVID-19. Almost 80% of your members have helped us during the COVID-19 times. So they know that they can fund infrastructure, they know that they can fund last mile connectivity, they also know that they can fund a lot of R&D work and studies that we need to do. And quite a few of them have also helped us with artificial intelligence, so it's not new for your members. Employees will never be covered under this clause, and that is also stated by our department through the MCA notification, because employees can afford their own vaccination. And government will be funding most of the vaccination, so it's only for the last mile connectivity, and the funds can go to the NGOs. So the funds of CSR can go only to the NGOs, to research institutes, to academic institutes of national importance, which is the IITs, NITs, ICERs, CSIRs, and the research institutes and academic institutes. And if you need to fund the startup for purchase of any infrastructure to be provided to the state government, etc., you can fund it through the incubator. Because again, incubator is allowed to receive the funds. The same was followed during COVID-19. So we will not encourage any kind of deviation from the CSR rules in terms of whom you can fund. So that's very clear that research institutes, academic institutes, startups, incubators for startups are the ones who can receive funds, because they will need to provide you utilization certificates. They will need to do the accounting as per the CSR regulations. So in this garb of vaccination, we are not really going to permit any change of rules for which is already existing in CSR. We've done it for a year, and we'll continue to do it, with your support. So let me just take you through each of these so that you understand a bit of what these interventions are all about, and so that whatever interests you, you can take it forward. The first one being vaccination drive community engagement. This is not really under our purview. It is your NGOs who can work with the state government. They can work with the local government hospitals for the underprivileged, where you can fund the NGO to do this community engagement and get them to understand about vaccines and how important they are and so on, and also get them to use the application, the app which is available, and queue themselves for vaccination and so on. This is a very small chunk of money, but in terms of effort, I think that's quite a lot of effort over there, which the country would require. The second one being cold storages and cold chain. There are several innovative cold chains and cold storage facilities today. Small startups have come up with a lot of innovations. They are all market ready. They have been using it, to go for the last mile connection, be it for northeast or remote rural areas. All of these will require cold storages. Even if it is room temperature, by the time it reaches the last mile, you will need some kind of a cold storage. So there are a lot of portable cold storages which the startups would be happy to manufacture and produce. Like I said, there were 300 innovations during COVID that startups offered to the country and also outside at a very low cost and high quality. So you can purchase it through the incubator. The funds should be routed through the incubator so that your CSR utilization certificate and accounting is done well. The third one, and also in the case of cold storages, organizations like Siemens and quite a few Cummins and quite a few manufacturing companies like BHEL, etc., can offer their manufacturing setup so that the cold storages that the startup has can also be manufactured at a scale that this country would require. Because all of us must understand that even for us, our scientist community, as well as for the startups, this has been the first time. So quite a lot of the, we've been discovering very fast, and we've been working very fast. And the cold storage, of course, yes, it will be useful after the vaccination also. And there are several things for which cold storages are required. Last stage vaccination development. Now there are quite a few vaccines, which is in the last stage. There's one with Johnson & Johnson. There's one with the Indian Institute of Science, Professor Vardarajan, who's working on one. There are quite a few vaccine variants which are at the last stage. So proposals for that can be sourced and provided to you if you would like to fund those, so that we have more variants, because the population that we're talking about, not only in India, but also other developing countries like African countries, etc., vaccination, one or two vaccinations are surely not going to be enough. So we need at least 5 or 6 variants coming out this year. The next one is testing and sequencing studies. Like the Honorable PSA discussed about this type of studies. This is basically to look at how you can fund either the hardware, which is, you need BD systems, you need Illumina and all the other machinery for doing sequencing, or the consumables, because when you do these tests, you take the swab and you do the test, you need a lot of consumables. So any of you can fund those consumables or fund the studies, and we will be happy to provide those proposals. And then, of course, the machinery itself is quite expensive, so that's the capex part of it. Luckily for us, most of the during last year we had quite a lot. Intel and some other organizations bought those machinery and provided to our research institute, so that was quite a relief. But consumables, like I said, would be required. Funding to prepare, disseminate training manual in different languages. Again, we could always provide a training manual in English, and you could take it on and work on the different languages and convert them. So this is basically for the health workers and people who are, who needs to be vaccinated, who doesn't need to be vaccinated, and so on. So that's a technical training manual that could be provided. Post-vaccination studies, we need to do several of them because of the fact that, as I said, 4 to 5 variants would be coming into the market. So we need to know which is the best of the lot. So several immunology studies and vaccination studies post-vaccination studies would be required, where people could, between these variants, which are the best ones, which are coming up with lesser side effects, etc., could be showcased, so that those are the ones which would be scaled up. Largely. Contribution in kind, of course, artificial intelligence experts, but let me tell you, we already have quite a few AI experts who have been linked to the research institutes. So whoever is coming after that, it all depends on the number of studies and the scale up of studies, and depending on that, we could take your experts. But any such offer is quite welcome. It's just that, the expectations need to be managed in terms of how many AI experts would be required for this kind of studies. Funding and purchase of consumables, like I said, this is the biggest one, because sequencing machines and systems, there's quite a lot of work to be done. All kinds of studies need sequencing work, so that would be essential. And then you have, like I said, factories and capacity for manufacturing cold storages and any other area supporting COVID testing and vaccination. So I think you have IGIB, you have CCMB in Hyderabad, IGIB in Delhi. The 4 clusters that Sir mentioned were Pune, Hyderabad, Bangalore, and you have Delhi, yeah. So 4 of these clusters, we want to pilot all of these studies in these clusters, and then at a national level, and then scale it up. So that is the structured manner in which we would like to go. So each of these, we would be happy to source the proposals from different startups, from national incubators and national institutes of eminence. As far as possible, we would like to stick to quality. So, since these technologies are such that they need to have high quality and low cost, we will be sourcing the proposals from around 100 institutes and 4 clusters. So this is all that we will be able to provide in terms of proposals to you on a regular basis. And of course, your NGOs are all linked with your own CSR organizations, and you can surely work with them. But that's, like I said, a very small chunk of CSR funds can go into that, but you'll be able to use the volunteers per se. Yeah, so that's about it from me. I'm happy to take questions which are relevant to these projects.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Sapnapote. I think you've spelled it out so nicely. And I think I will now take some questions. We'll start some questions. There has been some questions specific to the CSR policies and law, and probably I think Rishi would be ideal to respond to these. I'll read it out to those. So Savisa has asked, if CSR funds are spent on making the vaccine accessible to common people, what kind of a liability would companies have if there are adverse effects or any other safety concerns? So how do we address that situation?
Yeah, so look, there are currently, adverse effect liability insurance in place that, firms have. And different countries, at least UK, US, EU, they actually have provided blanket immunity indemnity for these manufacturers. And I am of the belief that once we have a public rollout in India at a mass scale, this sort of statutory indemnification would be provided by the government at some stage, because there would definitely be certain adverse reactions, adverse effects on which, even if companies are going to be providing those vaccines, and this is outside of CSR. Even for example, if companies generally out of their normal corporate responsibility to provide those vaccines to their employees, and if there are adverse effects, I don't think companies to that extent would want to take liability upon themselves, and against which there would be certain insurances that will have to fall in place. Apart from that, there could also be certain statutory indemnification that the government could look at. So how this is going to pan out, we'll only know once we are ready for a more public rollout of vaccines. And when that happens, probably there will be few policy discussions that would happen around this space, certainly.
So if I can come in here, the vaccines which are being developed are already being funded by a lot of CSR organizations as well as individual HNI folks. And the indemnity stops with the vaccination developer, and not with the funder who provides the funds for vaccination development.
True. Thank you. Thank you, Sapna. Thank you, Rishi. I think I'll go with the next question again to you, Rishi. I think we'll address those first. So this is from Sumitra. So she's asking, what if CSR funds are sponsored for procuring cold storages or capacity for manufacturing cold storages to NGOs? Will there be any potential liability on the company?
No, not really. And I think one important aspect that should also be addressed in respect to this question is whether CSR expenditure for those physical infrastructures would actually be allowed as a deductible expenditure under CSR. Now, currently CSR, and I'll also come on the first part after I answer this specific issue. Currently, CSR expenditure which is carried in furtherance of 135 is not allowed to be claimed as a tax deductible expenditure. However, when we look at CSR expenditure, which is of the nature which falls within section 30 to 36 of the Income Tax Act, then one can claim that as a valid deduction. For example, if we have CSR expenditure which is concerns paying out or spending on scientific research related to the business of CSR contributing companies, then that could be considered as a deductible expense. So currently, a lot of different people have had different ideas on what could be considered as deductible or non-deductible, and few things do seem to be falling in the gray. But when we look at the kind of expenses that companies carry out in furtherance of their core activities, and if that happens to be pharma companies or companies engaged in R&D on the vaccine program, there could actually be few expenses that they could claim as deductible expenses, even if they do that in respect of rolling out physical infrastructure or spending on the supply chain on the supply chain management side of it.
Okay.
And what was the first part, Akansha? I just forgot the first part.
So I think the first part was more about procuring if the the CSR funds are used for or sponsored for procuring cold storages or capacity for manufacturing cold storages to NGOs. Will there be any potential liability on the company? So I think
No, that should not be, because you look, currently when you fund these for NGOs to be engaging in procurement activities, you essentially grant it out to these NGOs, and then these non-profits will essentially have to use those funds for procurement. So to that extent, when the money is of a voluntary nature, I don't see any specific liabilities. I mean, there could be few specific indemnities, representation warranties that you may have in the context of the CSR granting agreement that this CSR granting company would have with the non-profit, and those specific ifs and buts can always be can be built in within the CSR proposal or the agreement that the parties will have between themselves. But outside of that, no, I don't think so.
Sure.
So, Akansha, if I can come in here, during last year, a lot of organizations funded the incubators so that the incubators could, request the startups to produce as well as supply mass PPE testing kits as well. There was absolutely, no issues in terms of the CSR utilization certificates or accounting, and of course there was absolutely, because CSR funds and the CSR organizations is the third level. So then you have the incubator, then you have the manufacturer, So naturally the CSR fund or the CSR organization is not going to be affected in any way. And all of this has been tested and tried last year for at least about 10 to 15, items, ventilators, masks, PPE. So a lot of CSR funds have gone in purchasing these through the startups. However, the funding was given to the incubator, and the incubator funded the startup, so that there is no, the utilization certificate accounting is done by the incubator along with the corporate. So there should not be any issue. Infrastructure purchase, that is, cold storage purchase, all of that is under the vaccination, clause that we have inserted. And also pharma companies are allowed, to go out of their way and fund any of these studies, because the pharma companies also understand sequencing and all these studies much better. So, be it BD, be it Biocons, several of them have come forward to fund some of these studies as well, and infrastructure which is required for these studies.
Done. Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Sapna. I think since we're running out of time, I have this one question that I would like to ask to Krishna. I think the two of them actually. So The person has not cited the name, but the question is that several corporates here have expertise and products that are aligned to some of the requirements that are listed on the presentation over here. Donations in kind or product or services is not recognized by the law. What is the recommendation on leveraging expertise of corporates outside of their employee talent under CSR?
All right. I think, Akanksha, this is obviously, the law is on interpretation, right? I mean, the law always has been on liberal interpretation of how you kind of spend expertise. There are today organizations that are, if you're able to dedicate those resources and not, put them in a more, if you can still create them in a project mode, kind of form. We have examples where it can be done, because you remember there are a lot of CSRs which also self-implement CSR programs. The law doesn't necessarily always require you to go through an implementation agency. You can self-implement, and there are many of them which are doing it that way. So very happy to connect with the person and give them more specifics on how that can be done in a particular context. But yes, it is something that can be done, but obviously you have to kind of understand the law a little more in detail. So very happy to help them out.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Krishna. I think we've kind of reached towards the end of the roundtable, and due to the paucity of time, while we are getting so many questions, what we can do is...
And sorry, Akansha, I just wanted to intervene here as well. In case NASSCOM wants anything to be inserted or any particular clause to be explained, further, we'll be happy to take it to MCA. For instance, that employees will not be allowed was articulated because of some of the inputs that I had received. So happy to articulate infrastructure addition, because all of this is included. But if you want it to be written explicitly in the clause for you to understand, we will be happy to take it with the MCA.
That is so wonderful, Dr. Sapna. That is extremely wonderful. Sure, NASSCOM Foundation will definitely kind of collaborate, and we will definitely put forward all the requests that we are getting from our CSR leaders over here, and we will try to get another kind of a small, roundtable where we can kind of take this in more depth. With that, I would really like to thank you all. Thank you so much, Rahul. Thank you so much, Krishna and Sapna. I can't thank you enough. You've been the threading pillar, and you've helped us put this whole thing together. And with that, I think just wanted to close it formally. I want to request Santosh Abraham, the Vice President, NASSCOM Foundation, to formally come and deliver the vote of thanks. Santosh, over to you.
Thank you, Akanksha, and I think it's just a formality for me to come in. I think it has been wonderful hearing all the conversations about how we can support the vaccination drive across the country. So I'd like to place on record our immense thanks to Honorable Professor Vijay Raghavan for his kind words, and for Mr. Gagan Singh for taking us to that insightful fireside chat. Also would like to thank Dr. Sapna Poti for helping us with this entire conversation. A very big shout out to Rahul and Krishna. You've always been with us whenever we wanted to set up conversations to clarify, questions and other clauses. So you've always been there, and thank you so much for that. Also, would like to thank Raghuram from the Center of Excellence in IoT for helping us with time for Mr. Gagan Singh. But again, as you have to end most of these activities with some wise quotes. And one of the things that I've recently picked up was a quote by Ella Biss on this book called On Immunity, and she goes to say, imagine the action of a vaccine not just in terms of how it affects a single body, but also in the terms how it affects the collective body of a community. And I think that will help us think about the collective ability that we bring in to ensure that there is a reach of the vaccination to the complete society. Thank you once and for all. Thank you for patient listening. We are more than happy to take questions, both Krishna and Rahul. We will be more than happy to support. And thank you once again, Dr. Sapna Poti. And thank you, Akanksha, for hosting this wonderful series. Thank you once again.
So much.
A big shout out to all the corporates who've joined us today. hopefully some of the questions were answered for you. If not, again, as Dr. Poti said, she'd be more than happy to take up more questions. A phone number and email ID is available with us. So will Rahul and Krishna. So thank you very much. And,
Santosh, while I thank everybody, I also want to take just 20 seconds of your time. We are also, this huge, beautiful drive. We are launching the Tech for Good charter, the e-series. We want you to kind of officially launch the teaser for us, please. So
sure.
I'll just request, Saurabh to kind of.
Thank you.
So I think what better than this occasion where we can have the butterfly for Tech for Good to fly. Thank you so much, everybody. I hope this session was very insightful and helpful to all of you. And you can always reach out to NASCOM Foundation. The entire team is here to help you with all the questions. We will always be with the Satwa team, Sri Krishna and Rahul. So thank you so much for everybody. Hope you have a wonderful day ahead, and do not let go of your masks. Even though vaccinations are here, even though people are working hard, do not lose your masks and keep sanitizing. And we all have to protect ourselves until we all get the vaccinations. Thank you so much. A heartfelt thank you to Dr. Sapna for putting this all together and being there for us for all the queries, and how much we've tried to. Thank you so much, and it's a pleasure once again.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.